this supposed to start at 5? Oh, microphone just went on. It's supposed to start at 5:40, right? Or 17:40?
Yeah.
Guess I'll get started. Cool. So it's funny, this is a perfect room for how I usually start my talk. So one of the things I've learned in public speaking is that no matter what country I am, city, state, everyone always follows the same seating rules. The men's urinal style seating. Person, empty seat, person, empty seat, person, empty seat, except for those two gentlemen that work together. And we work together, right? Yep. And there is almost never a person in the front row with two exceptions. One, they're needed for accessibility, can't hear or see or something. Or two, they're speaker friends and they're here to heckle you. But we're engineers, so we're not that social, right? Okay, a little bit about me. My name's Joe Guadagno. Here's my contact information on the next slide. You can get your phones ready if you want. There'll be a QR code that will take you to the slide deck for here with all the references that I'll talk about in the talk, as well as the source code and the PowerPoint decks if you want. That's my contact information. I blog, I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky. I have some videos on YouTube around these conference talks and others. Did you get it quick enough? I'll also have it at the end. One of the things you'll also notice is at the bottom for any links, it usually starts with jjg.me/uno and then something. So you can either take a picture or write it, or if you scan that, you can get all the links on that page. So for the agenda, we're going to kind of walk through what the Uno platform is. We're going to walk through what the Uno platform provides for you. Then I'll show you how you can get started, and then the rest of it's going to be demos. So there'll be about 10, 15 minutes of PowerPoint slides, and I'm sorry for that, but you need some of the foundation for it. Another thing I like to say, you paid money for this conference. If you're not getting what you need, by all means, feel free to leave. You won't hurt my feelings. I get a little funny story about that too. I was in a conference like this, similar size, except there was no middle row. So there's a person kind of sitting where that person is, dead center middle. And he gets up in the middle of the talk at like 15, 20 minutes in. I'm like, oh, sorry you didn't get anything out of the talk. And he's doing this whole, excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, as he's getting by here. It's like, no, it's a great talk. I just got to go to the bathroom. Like, that's a really interesting thing to tell everyone, in the middle of a conference with 200 of your closest friends. He then comes back about 10 minutes later doing the whole excuse me, excuse me, excuse me, before he sits down and says, hey, did everything come out okay? He was mortified, probably never left the seat of the conference again. So, moral of the story, feel free to leave. You may get heckled. Okay, so what's the Uno platform? Basically, the Uno platform tries to solve a problem. You have a killer app that you want to make available on Windows, Linux, Mac, OS, Android, blah, blah, blah. It's real hard to do that, especially to have all the expertise, someone that knows Android, someone that knows iOS, someone that knows Windows, the web, etc. You also have a lot of business applications that have been around for a long time, generally written in some sort of .NET, preferably C#, because this only works with C#. Then you have the problem of skilling and everything. If you're a small team, do you hire one person for each platform? Do you hire two just to avoid the bus terminated project? It's one of the things that Uno tries to solve for by providing one platform for you to be able to do all that. And the way it works, there are a couple of pieces. It's all built upon the desktop. So you see here, it works on Windows desktops or mobile devices or webs. And the way it does that is by building upon with .NET. So you build your apps using .NET, C#, and then it writes out a single code base. So using the Uno SDK, it'll write out to an iOS using Xcode. It'll write out to Android using the Java libraries. It'll write out to Windows using the WinUI toolkit. And for web, it'll write out a WebAssembly application for you. So in each of the instances, it always writes out a native app. You're probably wondering how that does that. Oh, he's got to go to the bathroom. It does that with magic. It's just basically behind the scenes, it has its own compilers that are compiling everything. The one caveat to that is because of the licensing rules with Xcode. Xcode can only be used on a Mac. So if you're building for the macOS or iOS, you need to have a Mac on your network to be able to build it. If you don't, there are services that can actually do that. There are hosted services where you can send them the build and they will compile it for you. So Uno is comprised of basically 4 parts, although there's 5 listed here. There's themes. It has a Fluent theme for the Microsoft look and feel. It has a Material theme for Androids, and it has the Cupertino feel or theme for iOS devices and Macs. And behind the scenes, there are a bunch of extensions it provides, things like navigation, hosting, dependency injection. It tries to make it as easy as possible for you to build it, which we'll see as we start doing some of the demos. Then it provides a toolkit. So it has a toolkit of its own functions like tab bar, nav bar, auto layout, etc. Plus, it can also use the Windows Community Toolkit, which was an open source thing built by a lot of Microsoft MVPs that was used to help the Windows UI platform. And that's where you see the third party. There's also other third parties that have written tools or components. So if you're using Telerik or Syncfusion or DevExpress, they have tools that can work in here. So you can use existing frameworks that you're familiar with. And then it provides a bunch of tools for you to be able to build and compile those apps. There's an app called Uno Check, which I'll show you. This is, if you've done any MAUI development, this is very similar to MAUI Check. It'll run through your machine and make sure you have all the minimum requirements in order to build on the Uno platform. It has a very powerful project widget, which we'll see, and then some other tools built in. And by all means, it's a pretty light audience. If there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask, and I'll just do like my wife does and ignore you. Wow, no one liked that one. So the one thing about this is it's truly native. Like I said, you have from the Uno platform here, and then it uses all the native kits to build for it. So it uses the UI kit for Apple, the app kit for Mac OS, and then Views with that, and then HTML5 for the WebAssembly apps. And then if you're doing stuff with Linux, it uses the Skia toolkit or Skia. I don't know actually how to pronounce it. I've heard it many different ways, like Azure. Yes?
For like watches and TVs and that kind of thing.
Yes. It also supports the Tizen chipset, which allows you to build for this watch right here or any Android-based TVs that have the Tizen chip. It uses the Skia library to do a lot of that, or the Android, depending on the version of the TV. So here's a sample of some of the markup. It's basically a grid with a text box that has a binding value, and we'll see that. And then this is how it renders on Linux, how it renders on iOS. So it tries to use whatever the native UI for that component is. So you see a slider here. It looks almost the same with all of them, except for the macOS, Linux, and Android. And the reason for that is because on the Linux, Mac, and Android, Linux, Mac, yes, and Android, their default size is whatever that highest number is, unless you specify like a min and max for it. The iOS, Windows, and WebAssembly default to 100 as max units. That's why they look slightly off So licensing, there are two different licenses or two different things to be aware of with this. It's free and open source. Anyone can use it. They basically sustain themselves through paid support. So just like the Avalonia or a lot of modern open source projects now, they make their money through people, having issues or wanting to do stuff with it. There is going to be a hot design visual designer that's going to be a paid product and optional. I'll show you that. It's still in preview in a little bit, but that's going to be something that will provide you a built-in designer to be able to build out the apps that works on whatever operating system you're working on. So what does it provide? We got XAML support, so your control templating, data templating is available. You have styling and themes. We have conditional XAML, native control integration, so you can do things like camera, Bluetooth, etc. You have animation, so it supports all the kind of swiping, transitions, and stuff, which we'll see on the next slide, I think. You get all the data binding you have with XAML. So if you're familiar with building WPF apps or Maui-based apps, it's really not much difference between the two. And then lots of shapes and buttons. This slide is a little bit outdated. These are all the components that are built out of the box for it in a combination of the Uno framework and the Unity, or not Unity, the Windows community thing. You'll see that there are buttons, there's toggle split buttons, there's flyouts, there's borders, there's rating controls. Everything that you typically would need to build an app is already available for you. Let's take a look at some of the themes. You can see that the themes are very respective to the platforms. So you as a developer don't need to do anything to get this. The platform will automatically see that it's running on an Android device and apply the material design. It'll see it's on the Windows device and it will apply the Fluent UI to it. You can, however, override that if you want. If you want your whole app to look like the Fluent UI, no matter what mobile device it's running on or platform it's running on, you can do that. I wouldn't recommend you do that because that's one of the benefits of this is that your app can look like a true native app on whatever platform it's running. Here are some of the animations. You'll see the first one is sliding in and out. Second one is doing a verification, a little shaking of the screen when you type the pin wrong. And the other one kind of disappears and shows you fly in and fly out menus. These are all native and supported out of the box without any work from you. So images, you only have to add assets once to your project. And I put a little asterisk next to that. If you give it a high resolution picture, I forget the dimensions, let's just say 1024 by 1024, it will generate all the required images for Android, iOS. So like for iOS, it'll generate the 2 times, the 4 times. For Android, it'll generate the high density DPI ones and the low density. Again, it will generate them for you, but in reality, you'll probably want to do it yourself just to make sure that it's going to make the marketing department happy. Supports localization out of the box, basically language dash suffix, so en-uk- will work and it will translate it there, so we can say things like toilet instead of bathroom, etc. Especially if you're going to build an app around bathrooms. Supports localization through resource files like you would in Windows UI. You don't have to worry about the iOS plist files to generate all your strings or your Android strings.xml. It will generate those for you based on the resource file. Okay, it allows you to reuse all your existing libraries, so any .NET Standard 2.0 library, and I say 2.0 on purpose, it doesn't work with 2.1. There are a lot of breaking changes in 2.1 that broke forward compatibility for a lot of things, so it doesn't support that. There's third-party controls. I kind of showed you some of them before. You have Sync Fusion, Infragistics, there's Lightning Chart, and lots of others coming. As the platform matures, more and more component vendors, like I showed you on the previous slide, DevExpress is also on there in addition. It supports many different presentation frameworks. There are 2 that are built in, but you can basically use whatever presentation framework you want. Here are just some of the out-of-box ones that have support for it. Like I said, Skia, there's built-in support for SQLite. Infragistics has support, and then many different UI things. So let's get started. For IDEs, you can use Visual Studio Code, or JetBrains Writer. There's some compatibility issues depending on the environment and stuff, which we'll see on kind of like the next slide. If you're on Windows, purple checkboxes are everything you get if you're using, Visual Studio with Android, etc. So if I look here, and I'm only building for Windows 10 and 11, I can use Visual Studio or I can use JetBrains Writer. If I want Android, I can still use Visual Studio. I can use Visual Studio Code, JetBrains Writer, etc. You'll notice that there's quite a few X's and check marks around the Mac Catalyst, and that's because I said the licensing is very weird with Xcode on Windows. You need a Mac to actually compile it. There's also a getting started guide, which I think is on the reference links that will link to this. If you're developing on a Mac, you can pretty much build for everything but Windows, which, as you would imagine, there's not going to be a Windows UI for there, so you need to go back and forth. If you're a glutton for punishment or you just like the thrill, you can even build on Linux. However, your options are a lot more limited. You basically need to use JetBrains Writer or Visual Studio Code. JetBrains Writer gives you a little bit more than Visual Studio Code will. So enough about that. Let's go to some demos. And bear with me, there are a lot of things running on the machine right now to make these demos work. There's a Docker engine to provide some SQL services for one of the demos later on. There's an Android emulator running to show you that we can run code for Android. So way to get started, we're going to choose File, New, and we do File, New Project. The first thing you need to do is make sure you have the Uno extension. So you go to Extension, Manage Extensions, and then type in Uno. And I think I already had it installed. No, I don't have it installed. So let's hope the Wi-Fi is going to play nice with me. It usually takes about a minute or so to install. You technically don't need it to build it or to use it. It just has a lot more features once you do. Oh, look, I have to restart Visual Studio to do it. Let's go and stop that and then let it install. In the meantime, if you have the SDK installed, there is a tool that you need to get called the Uno check. So you see I have here .NET Tool Update. Is that font okay? I forgot to check the terminal font. Yeah. To install it, it's already installed, so it'll just eventually tell me that it's installed. But once it's installed, come on. It's just the fast internet now. Yeah, okay. So it's telling me that I already have a version, so I'm going to run the Uno check. Now it's going to prompt for administrator access because there's a lots of checks it has to do because the way my machine is set up. So here you get a machine or a look very similar to that of the Maui check. So the first thing it does Checks to make sure I have open JDK 11.0 or up. Make sure I'm using a version of Visual Studio 17.12 and up. Checks to make sure you have the right workloads installed. There, it has to have the multi-platform app, it has to have the ASP.NET and desktop development installed. If you don't have any of those, it will actually prompt you to install it. It has the intelligence to be able to go out and do that, assuming you have the ability to install stuff on your machine. Right now it's checking to make sure I have an Android emulator that is running. This one takes an extra minute because it has to call out to Android to say, hey, do you have an emulator? Even though there's literally one running right here. Oh, I selected in text, thank you. I was gonna say, it normally doesn't take that long. And that's it, everything is good. Well, that's because I ran through it last night. So I click enter, and it's good to go. Say, are you done yet? Modify. And once this is done installing, we can go back and launch Visual Studio with it. While that is up and running, we can kind of go through some of these. So the site for it is platform.uno. I know it's very, plays mind games on you because you have to kind of switch it in your head instead of Uno platform, but URL makes sense. So if you go to the how it works, it kind of explains everything. You'll notice the slides are very similar, or the images are very similar to the slides I have. It shows you what you need to do for it. The getting started, which is if you come to the docs and then getting started, it will tell you based on what product you want to use. So if you want to use Visual Studio, here's the setup, here are the workloads you need to install, how you can check your environment, which is running that Uno check tool that we just did, installing the extension, which is what we did. And then if you want to run it on Linux, or you want the ability to compile for Linux, you need to install the Windows subsystem. Something very similar for VS Code, except you'll notice with VS Code, there's also a Mac OS and a Linux. So if you're using Visual Studio Code on the Mac, here are the steps you'll want to follow. If you look at the Uno gallery, it's a good set of examples that actually show you the code working. You can get the actual text for this and see how it's going to look on the different environments. So this is what the buttons look like on material. If you have an elevated, field, total, outlined, or just text, here's what they look like on the fluid, which is just literally a button. And for the Cupertino, there are two. So each one of them has a different look. And you'll notice here, there is a light and dark mode. So you can see what your components look light and dark. And it has the ability to automatically change the app to, one second. It has the ability to change the app based on whatever the operating system setting is. Yes?
So does it actually use the native controls, say on macOS, or just does it make it look the same? You can switch in the web browser. It seems like it's the
It uses native controls, but for the web, it has style sheets to make it look like whatever you want it to. But it shoots for native controls whenever possible. So this is a helpful way to go and kind of look to see what's available. I can go and look at the breadcrumb bar and see what it's going to look like on everything. You can customize it and kind of tweak it to your settings. Let's see, are you done yet? Yep, we're done. Let's go back to Visual Studio. Here's that 15 minutes you were talking about to start it. So I'm going to do continue without code so we can go there and start it. So if I do file, yes, thank you. If I do file, new, project, I'll get a very similar looking product field. So I'm going to type in Uno. And you'll see that there are multiple options to choose from. We're going to just go with the platform app, but you can do a platform library if you're going to build a library or a set of components to work with Uno. You have that ability here. If you want to build a UI test library, or if you want to build with some legacy platforms like Xamarin and Windows or Universal Windows platform. So let's go with this. Click next, give it a name, the hardest name in the world. Click create, and in about 5 seconds, you'll see the template wizard. So this is a really cool kind of getting started. It allows you to choose what frameworks you want, what frameworks you don't want, what components you want, and it'll kind of pre-build your project for you. So if you look, we can choose .NET 8 or .NET 9. We'll choose .NET 8 because that's long-term support. You notice that another preset popped up. I have the ability to create a custom set of options or use the recommended. If I choose 9, when you start with 9, it doesn't give you that ability. So I'm going to choose .NET 8. Platforms, I'm going to say I want it to work on Android, iOS, basically everything in here. So it's going to build me those specific, it used to be projects, but now they're separate classes for each. So everything's going to be in one. And I'll just use the model view updated extended. We'll use XAML, but you can also use C# if you want. It has a fluid API, so you can do like form.button.add and then give it the specs of a button, or you can use XAML for it. We're not going to be doing a lot of changes to it, so I'm just going to choose XAML. You can choose whatever theme you want. You can subscribe to the theme service, which will do that dark and light themes for you automatically. What extensions you want to build in there. By default, the configuration and dependency injection is in there. All the others are kind of optional. I generally just click create, but I'm walking you through all the stuff. And then features, what do we want to support? We want to support the toolkit. Do we want .NET MAUI embedding? You could do that. It tends to make your app a little bit slower. Do you want to include a server? If you're going to build a backend API to it, it can actually create that project for you and start with the helper. It'll create the progressive web app manifest for you, as well as Visual Studio Code debugging. And then authentication, you can use whatever you want. For this demo, I'm just going to choose none and leave it that way so we don't have to worry about that. Application, give it whatever name you want. This is the name that's going to be the identifier. So in this particular case, com.companyname.unotest is what it would look like in the Apple Store or the Android phone or Android store, and then the operator. Then you could choose what kind of testing frameworks you want in it. For the sake of this demo, I'm not going to include any. And then this is a new feature in the latest versions. You can actually have GitHub Actions or Azure pipelines generated for you that can actually build your stuff. So let's click create, wait a week to 10 days for it to happen. It's usually pretty quick. And then we'll have the app. So once the app's fully loaded in Visual Studio, I am going to do a quick build because the first build takes a while, then I'll walk you through all the things. You'll also notice right around here, there's a shortcut presenter. So this section right here, that'll track any keyboard shortcuts that I do. I try to speak to them out loud when I do it, but sometimes I forget, so you'll see it there. So the first thing I'm gonna do is start to build the project. One of the first things that happens is you get this annoying thing that, stop it. I'm never a fan of this bar, especially when you're doing demos. I rarely ever use it. So it tells you next steps. So this is what you're gonna wanna do if it's your first time. It'll kind of walk you through if you're using XAML versus the XAML with the MVVM platform or C# markup. This basically takes you right to the Uno documentation. And then this is the typical, Microsoft Getting Started that will tell you things like, hey, here's how you can build it, here's how you host the app, etc. So if you look at the app itself, it looks relatively small. There's a couple of things in assets. These are where all the icons and everything are, so you can put your own specific ones in here. Then there's also this shared assets.md. You'll see a lot of .md files in here. They're basically telling you what you need to do. Like if you want to put in your own custom assets, here's kind of what you need to do and the scales for them. Models is just a typical, model. It's just C# classes for it, nothing specific to the platform. Then the platforms, you'll see that there's a folder for each platform. Now these folders hold everything that is specific to that platform. This is where you get to override things or make changes like to the Android manifest, or if you want to change the main activity, which is how the apps start in Android, you could do it here. If you want to put custom assets for just your Android project, you can do it here. And if you click on the About Assets, it tells you exactly what you need to do. This allows you to create any custom like audio files or video files that you want for your app. And you'll see the same thing for desktop, iOS, and Mac. A lot of these things are the default out of the box, and then you can tweak them to how you want. But for the most part, generally for an everyday app, you really don't need to do much with it. And that plist is not working well. It's probably because the build is still going on, so Visual Studio is like, stop, I need a minute. Presentation is just that. This is all the UI for it. We'll get into that in a little bit. And then everything else here is specific to the strings and styles are specific to the platform. So here I can see, here are the strings in English, in Spanish, French, and whatever PTBR is. But you can customize them as you need to. Yeah, that's an error because I tried to open the plist file when it was building. Okay, let's see. I think that was all we need to show, and let's see what it looks like. So you'll have in the Visual Studio debugger dropdown the ability to select what kind of project you want it running on. In this case, it's selected that I'm going to use the WinApp SDK to build a packaged app. I can choose Android emulators. If I choose Android local devices, it's going to look to see if there's any devices. Right now I have one running, the Pixel 9 Vanilla Cream, so it recognized that one. It'll also see if you have any local iOS devices or simulators. So let's run this app and let's deploy it to the Android. So I'm going to go and choose Android local devices and deploy it to that device. Click play, and then let's switch over to the Android. So this is just running a Pixel 9 emulator. If I look here at Visual Studio and go to output, you'll see it's building, but there's an Uno platform specific output that can tell you everything about the build. Like right now, it's failed to load a project, which is interesting. What project is that? Oh, remote control, that one's okay. And it should be deploying right around now. See, once this progress bar gets fully green, there it is. It just dropped off the app right there on the screen. It should start up in a second, and then there'll be a debug bridge created between the two, and then I'll be able to play around with the app. Here it goes. It started, and I think if this works, I get my presenter hello world creds done for the day because I think it actually says hello world in your first app. Come on. Oh, it doesn't. But I can enter, I can enter my name, and then it will update that. If I click on go to second page, it shows it shows the name. You also notice that up here, it's kind of hard to see, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It threw a little toolbar on there. It looks like a flame and what looks like a disk. So this icon here indicates that the latest change you're seeing in the emulator matches what's in Visual Studio. This is the hot reload, which allows you to forcibly get Visual Studio to reload the code. So it supports hot reload, or as I like to call hot mess, because it's very problematic. So let's go and take a look at that. So let's go to our solution, and we are going to open the presentation folder and do the main page.xaml. Let's get you out of here. So here it says enter your name. I don't think that's very nice of them, so let's give it a little British love and do enter your name, please. And then if I hit save, if I go back to the Android emulator, I got to go back to that page. Come on. Hey, my back button stopped working. Did the app crash? No, let's stop it and restart it. That's why I said hot mess is sometimes a real hot mess. So let's throw it in there and then make sure it's running again. Usually the second time it starts a lot faster. Come on. Like I said, there's lots of things running. And if you're catching an eye on this debug window, there's lots of things happening behind the scenes to get this working. So there it says, your name, please. Let's go and take this out because I don't want to do that anymore. Hit save. Let's see if it popped up. Didn't pop up, so sometimes you have to click on this little button to let it go. And then eventually it's going to send the new version there. So it allows, without you having to stop and start and stuff. Couple of limits to it. You can add controls to it, but you can't add any events. So let's say I wanted to do something like this. And I'm copying and pasting code so you don't have to watch me painfully type. Let's say I want to do this. So this, I'm building a slider that basically will change the number from 0 to 100. So let's save that. Let's see if it actually updated it here. Didn't update it yet, so let's go and force the update. Now it should add it, and there it is. So now I have the binding, and I can go and move it back and forth. So I don't really have to shut down Visual Studio. This works because it's just using binding, but if there was an event like a go to next page, that won't work. That actually has to require the app to stop and get restarted. So let's shut down the Android emulator for a minute and come back to here. So let's take a look at another feature that Uno has that works with the desktop now. So in the very beginning, I was talking about licensing. There is a license for this product coming soon. Right now, it's not licensed. It's free, but they have the ability to add a designer to it. So if I click on that button, the flame, I'll have the ability now to edit. So I can edit my app in real time. So let's say I don't want to say go to second page. I want to say, well, I got to find a property. There it is. Let's just say page 2. And then it'll show you in real time what it looks like. You have the ability to come in, drag and drop buttons on here. Like I can add a new combo box by just clicking and dragging, and now that combo box is there. You can hit this button here, which will toggle the interactive mode, meaning now I'm not here. I can see what it actually is going to function like. And I have undo, redo buttons. And then this is a really helpful thing, the designer settings. You can set the resolution of this screen. So if you want to try it out, what it looks like landscape or portrait, what it looks like on a 1024 by 768, what it looks like on a 19 by 1080, or whatever size. You can zoom it in. It allows you to change the form factor and see what it looks like in real time. You can then also change to see what your app looks like in night mode or light mode, which is really helpful. And then when you're done, you can just click this button, and those changes are synced back. You see here, update successful. If I come back to the code, Visual Studio is going to tell me that this file changed. I click yes. We'll see that now that there's a combo box that was added. So that's pretty cool. You got the ability to do designing, which right now Visual Studio and most major products really lack good UI designers. For next demo, we're going to kind of go back to our contacts app. So we are going to, let's stop you for a second. I have this API that's running in the background. If we look at this, you'll see it just returns a JSON file with contact information. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's a couple of things you need to know when you're working with the APIs in the Uno platform. Let's go, where are you, the code? Pop it out right there. So in order for you to access the internet on an Android device, you have to actually request that permission to do that. And that is held inside of the Android manifest file, so this file here. So if I double click on here, you'll see I have the ability to change things like the name of the application, the display name. Not going to go through that, but if you're familiar with Android development, those are very common properties. Then I have to navigate down this list to see all the features. Like you might have seen if you want the ability to connect with Bluetooth devices, you have to request that. And the reason for that is because the Android and iOS operating systems want the users to know what the applications are doing. So you have to request permission. So when the application first runs, it's going to say, oh, this app wants internet access. Do you allow it? This app wants access to your contacts, etc. So we're going to tell it to that we want internet access, and then save it. And essentially, it just writes out that property to this Android manifest. Right now, we're using the Visual Studio editor for it, but if we look at the file itself and choose open with, and let's do text editor, you see it just says it's using the permission of internet. Okay, now that we have the internet done, there's a couple of other small tweaks. These are going to be specific for the Android, and to save typing and stuff, I am going to copy and paste these over. So I'm going to open the folder and files, and then copy these files over. Now let's make sure I'm in the right directory. Uno test. And then just copy these. This way you don't have to watch me do a bunch of typing. So essentially I added a bunch of new models, address, address type, contact, phone, and phone type. That's going to come back from the service. I added a service called contact service, and this is basically going to go and call that API. There's nothing special in here except these first 2 lines of code, lines 11 through 15. So you notice here if it says if underscore underscore Android underscore underscore, that's a compile time directive saying if you're building this for Android, use this. Android doesn't support local hosts. So in this particular case, I'm running the app. The Android app is running locally on my machine, and typically I would access that through localhost. It doesn't support that. It exposes a address of 10.0.22 in order for your app to access it. So if you're doing local development on a web service that's local, you need this piece of code. Otherwise, just use localhost. And there's a couple of other things here, like if WASM, do this. And this is because on the WASM development, which is the WebAssembly, they have a custom HTTP handler that handles proxies and everything. So you need to do a different one for that. Otherwise, everything else is the same, but just a basic getting and setting properties. I also I updated the presentation main page to add in a new button that says See Context. So how we navigate to that, because you notice that there's no code here and there's no binding. I created an event for that that says on button context click, very visual basic-ish way of doing it, to say navigate to the page that's of type context, which is this page. And all this page does is basically takes in that data binding, which is the data which I'm going to pass in and then fill out the list. So if everything works okay and I didn't mess anything up, when we go to run it on our simulator, we should see a new button on the page. Now this is going to, well, I already closed the app, but the app would typically close if it was running because there's a new version, and behind the scenes, the old version gets uninstalled, and then this new version gets installed. Oh, I think it's going to fail. Like I said, I forgot something. I forgot to add some references. I need to add a reference to 2 NuGet packages in order for this to work. So let's do manage NuGet packages, browse, and then system.net.http. I'm going to install that. Yes, yes. And then system.text.json. So I can read the files that come, read the file that comes back. Once that's done, I should be able to build it. Let's make sure I can build it. Control-Shift-B. It built. One of the other things you'll notice, you'll see a lot of build errors in here, and the build errors vary. So this particular one is saying the build is failing for .NET 8 Android, and a couple others because I don't have that selected or running. It's trying to build it in the background. Let's see if this works now. Come on. Oh, my build failed. Namespace. Oh. This happened before because when I import them, they're in a different namespace and it generally doesn't like it. Do. So I said copy paste will save me and it ended up hurting me. Now let's try to build it. If all else fails, we revert back to the pre-built sample that works. Last build, if not, I'm going to open up the other project. Come on. No matter how fast the machine is, it's never fast enough when you're on stage building a project. Okay, so let's, oh, it's still going. Says it's ready, but you see the little build icon there going? Nope, it failed, so let's go and open up the complete project. Open project. See, clever. Uno test backup. Oh, the problem was I named the file wrong when I started. So let's go with Android local devices, this. Come on, Visual Studio, you can do it. I'm waiting for everything to stop on the bottom before I hit play. Now it should be sending it over. Let's take this off so we can kind of see it running. This is worse than watching paint dry. It's like, come on, you can do it. Come on. Oh, I guess I didn't hit play. Sorry. You'll also notice that you start to see some warnings in here. The Uno platform is usually good enough to let you know how to find those. These are two documented problems in the Windows UI Android SDK that they don't implement those features. So when the Android app gets compiled, it says, hey, you don't implement those features. Okay, found the device. So now it's ready to send it over. Come on, send it. There it goes. So now with our new XAML, we should see two buttons. The original will go to second page, and the new one that says See Contacts. And I am going to bring up this. This is the API project running. This is the API project running, so you can see any of the calls that were made as soon as I click See Contacts. We see the call to get contacts. And then it's loading. It's going to be a little slow because it's pulling images off the internet. It's not designed for, ooh, I got an error. That's new. There is an error in the application. What was the error? I wonder if I have the ports wrong in this. It shouldn't be because it was working here. It actually made the call. There's probably a null error that the platform doesn't handle now. Try it one more time. If not, we can go to the repo and download the sample. That actually works. Come on, come on, come on. I made the call. Yep, there's must be something with the new version. Like I said, for those that were here early, I updated to the latest version of Uno yesterday, and now there looks like there's a breaking change. So I'll have to fix that and test it on the demos up there. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Already covered that. This part you don't need to do anymore. It does it if you install the Uno extension, but essentially all the project templates that come with it. If you do the .NET tool, install G Uno check, it'll download all the templates for you. Here are some references to the slides I had up there. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. We got a couple more minutes left, although I'm sure everyone's anxious to go run to the party. Here's the deck with the source as well as all the slides and all the links. Any questions? I'm here to answer them, hopefully. Cool.